One word. That is what a source gave investigators when they recovered the new surveillance images from Nancy Guthrie's home. Not suspicious, not significant, not promising. Odd. In 44 days of searching for an 84-year-old woman who vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, in the early hours of February 1, 2026, investigators have chosen their public language with extraordinary care. Every word released has been measured. Every detail has been filtered through the machinery of an active federal investigation where the wrong phrase disclosed at the wrong moment can compromise a prosecution, tip off a suspect, or destroy evidence that took weeks to develop. Which is exactly why one word from one source to one news organization landed the way it did. Odd. Because in the world of forensic investigation, when a source with knowledge of an active FBI case describes newly recovered surveillance footage as odd, they are not reaching for a casual adjective. They are describing something that does not fit, something that contradicts prior assumptions about what happened, something that the investigators staring at the footage cannot yet explain and cannot yet disclose. This is the investigation into what that word means, what the new images showed, what they did not show, and what the silence of the cameras on the most critical night of this case may tell us about the person who took Nancy Guthrie. It begins with 3 cameras that were working perfectly until the night they mattered most. She wore a pacemaker connected to an iPhone app that monitored her heart in real time. She wore hearing aids during the day and removed them every night before bed. Without them, she could hear nothing. She was last seen on the evening of January 31st after a family dinner at her daughter Annie's nearby home. She was driven back to her residence. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera at her front entrance was disabled. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker stopped syncing with the iPhone on her nightstand. At 2:36 a.m., a vehicle was captured on a Ring camera 2.5 miles away. Her blood was found on the front porch, the door, and the driveway. The FBI, working with Google engineers for 10 days, extracted footage from residual data and back-end systems. That footage showed a masked figure on the porch, a male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. He wore full face covering, dark clothing, black nitrile gloves, a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack sold exclusively at Walmart, and a gun holster on his right hip. And on his right wrist, visible in the footage as he reached toward the camera, something that investigators and tattoo experts and forensic profilers have been examining ever since. A marking, dark, extending toward the forearm, the kind of marking that, on a man who took every other precaution to conceal his identity, may prove to be the detail that ends his anonymity. But before we get to the tattoo, we need to understand the new images and what the word odd actually means when a source uses it to describe what investigators found. ABC News confirmed the recovery through sources briefed on the investigation. Fox News independently confirmed it through separate sources. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a public statement acknowledging that investigators continue to analyze evidence from cameras as well as laboratory materials, without providing specific details about what had been recovered or what it contained. Here is what the images showed. In the period leading up to the abduction, in the days before February 1st, several people were captured by these motion-activated cameras in the back and side yard areas of the property. Investigators were able to observe them. After Nancy was taken, law enforcement officers were visible near the pool area in the recovered images, the aftermath of their arrival at the scene. And then comes the part that matters. On the night of the abduction, during the hours that matter most, the hours between 1:47 a.m. and 2:36 a.m., when everything happened, the cameras recorded nothing. Not the suspect, not movement, not a figure in the yard, nothing. The same cameras that had been reliably detecting and recording motion in the days before captured no activity whatsoever during the window when Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home. Investigators drew no immediate conclusions about why. They have not publicly stated why. But one source, speaking to ABC News, describe this absence with a single word: odd. Let that sit for a moment. The cameras were working. They had been capturing motion and triggering recording in the days before the abduction. On every other night, when the desert wildlife or the wind through the desert plants or a neighbor's movement triggered the sensors, the cameras did their job. But on the specific night when an 84-year-old woman was taken from her bedroom, carried through her front door, and transported somewhere in the dark desert surrounding Tucson, the cameras covering her backyard and side yard and pool captured nothing at all. No movement, no figures, no triggering events. Nothing. Before we go further into what that absence means, if you believe documented facts matter more than speculation, subscribe to Unsolved Archive right now and turn on notifications. We follow the evidence wherever it actually leads. Subscribe and hit the bell. 3 scenarios exist that could explain why those cameras recorded nothing on the night of the abduction. The first is the simplest and the least disturbing. The suspect simply did not enter from the back of the property. He came to the front door. He disabled the front doorbell camera. He entered through the front entrance. The backyard cameras never triggered because nothing happened in the backyard. The absence of footage is not mysterious. It reflects the suspect's actual route of entry, which was through the front. The second scenario is more complicated. The cameras were affected by the same signal disruption that multiple neighbors reported experiencing that night. Several residents of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood confirmed to investigators that their Ring cameras showed as unavailable or failed to record during the window of the abduction. One neighbor who lives directly behind Nancy Guthrie's property confirmed to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton that his 2 Ring cameras, specifically the ones facing the side of the house closest to Nancy's property, went inactive during that period. They had never failed before. His dog woke up at the same time, went to the door, and stared in the direction of Nancy's house. If a signal disruption device was active in the neighborhood that night, something capable of jamming Wi-Fi signals within a range of 30 to 100 feet, it could have targeted the cameras on the back of Nancy's property the same way it appears to have affected her neighbor's devices. The third scenario is the one that investigators have not publicly addressed, and that the word odd points most directly toward. The cameras should have captured something, and they did not. There was movement in that backyard on that night. The cameras were in position, the motion sensors were functional, and whatever happened, wherever the suspect moved, however he approached, whether he came from the desert behind the house and crossed the property before making his way to the front door, the cameras simply failed to record it. That failure, if it was not caused by a signal jammer, suggests something more deliberate. Someone who knew where those cameras were positioned, someone who understood their range and their angle and their triggering threshold, someone who moved through the property in a way that specifically avoided the zones those cameras would detect. That is not the behavior of a stranger. That is the behavior of someone who had been there before and knew the layout of every corner of that property. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said on record in her own name to Newsweek, "It makes no sense to me that this wasn't completely targeted. The individual who approached that door, head down, beelines toward that camera. They knew exactly where that camera was. If he knew where the front camera was, what does the absence of footage from the back cameras tell us about what else he knew?" Paul Powers, founder and CEO of FSNA, an AI-driven search and analytics company, explained the mechanics publicly in an analysis for News Nation. Wi-Fi jammers, he said, typically operate within a range of 30 to 100 feet and work by disrupting the signal between a device and its router, not by cutting the internet itself. If a device was connected by Wi-Fi to a home network and a jammer was active within that range, the device would lose its connection to the router. If the device was connected by Ethernet, it would maintain its internet connection. The jammer disrupts the wireless signal, not the underlying internet service. This distinction is forensically important. If investigators examine the router logs from Nancy Guthrie's home and find that the internet connection itself remained active while specific wireless devices lost their connection during the same window, That pattern would be consistent with a targeted Wi-Fi jammer, rather than a general outage or power failure. Powers also noted that it is possible to use a Wi-Fi jammer and still have footage upload to the cloud if the footage is captured and uploaded in the seconds before the jamming is active. The data can make it to cloud storage before the connection is severed. This may explain why the doorbell camera, which was physically disabled rather than simply jammed, produced footage at all. The data from the prior visit and the footage from the night of the abduction were extracted from local flash memory in the device, not from cloud storage, through a forensic process that required 10 days of work with Google engineers. What it does not explain is why the backyard cameras, which had been functioning normally, captured nothing on the night that matters. Brian Anton raised a theory in his reporting that deserves serious consideration. If the suspect entered the property from the desert behind the house, crossing the open desert terrain that borders the back of the Catalina foothills properties, and if he was carrying a signal jammer as he moved through that approach route, the jammer could have disrupted the cameras of the neighbors he passed before he ever reached Nancy's property. The neighbor whose cameras went dark may not have been affected by the jammer while the suspect was at Nancy's front door. He may have been affected earlier while the suspect was crossing the desert toward the back of the property. If this is accurate, it changes the picture of how the abduction was executed. The suspect did not arrive at the front door and then disable the cameras. He may have disabled the neighborhood's surveillance capability as he approached from behind, moved through the back of the property without triggering the cameras there, and then arrived at the front door to deal with the doorbell camera by hand. Because the Wi-Fi jammer he carried had a range that did not reliably reach the front of the property from his position in the back. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente said on Fox News Digital that when the suspect reached for vegetation to cover the doorbell camera lens, it revealed something significant about his level of preparation. He went out, walked out of the vestibule area, and grabbed some brush to try to cover it, and in the process, he revealed that I believe he has a tattoo on the underside of his right wrist, Clemente said. He also noted that the improvised use of vegetation to cover the camera suggests the suspect was not at all ready for that doorbell. If he had properly prepared for the front camera specifically, he would have brought a covering device with him rather than grabbing a plant from the yard in the moment. What this suggests, in Clemente's analysis, is a hybrid level of preparation. Sophisticated enough to approach through the desert, sophisticated enough to have a jammer, sophisticated enough to conduct prior reconnaissance visits and know the property's layout, but not sophisticated enough to come prepared for the specific challenge of the front doorbell camera when he reached it. If his goal was to go in and to get out quickly, then he failed at that, Clemente said in a separate Fox News analysis. It may indicate that his goal was something else entirely, and the extended timeline inside the house became either an afterthought or the result of something going wrong. 41 minutes inside that house, a suspect who was prepared in some ways and improvising in others, and cameras that should have captured his approach from behind that recorded nothing. This is the detail that investigators and forensic experts have been examining most intensively since the doorbell footage was released on February 10th, and in the weeks since, the public analysis has become significantly more specific. In the footage, as the suspect reaches toward the doorbell camera to cover the lens, his jacket rides up on his right arm. Visible on the underside of his right wrist, the side that faces outward when the arm is extended, is a dark marking. In some frames, it appears to extend toward the lower hand. In others, the lighting and angle make it difficult to read clearly. But multiple experts have now examined the footage independently and reached similar conclusions about what they are looking at. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jim Clemente was the first to publicly name it on the record. He told Fox News Digital, "I believe he has a tattoo on the underside of his right wrist." He added that in the identification process, a visible wrist tattoo can rule in and rule out leads. It is the kind of specific physical identifier that, when shown to someone who knows this person, produces instant recognition. The reason it produces recognition is precisely because of where it is placed. Most people who want to maintain a professional appearance while having tattoos place them several inches above the wrist, where a shirt cuff or watch will cover them. A tattoo on the lower wrist and hand, in the zone visible even when wearing long sleeves, is a deliberate choice, or a choice made in an environment where professional consequences don't apply. Certified forensics expert Jeffrey Gentry analyzed the placement publicly on crime stories with Nancy Grace. He said, "When you start looking at tattoos that are lower down on the hands and wrists, you start thinking about the people who get these tattoos. They might have been in prison. They might be part of gangs." Gentry also noted that the marking appears to extend toward the lower hand rather than sitting cleanly on the wrist itself, a detail consistent with a larger design that continues across the hand. Tattoo artist Darren "the Dude" Rosa, who has 30 years of professional experience in the industry and operates Rising Dragon Tattoos in New York City, provided the most detailed public analysis. Speaking on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, Rosa said the marking visible in the footage appears to be black and gray work, a specific stylistic category that uses black ink with gray shading rather than color. He said the style is prevalent in the southwestern United States and is particularly common in gang and prison tattoo culture in that region. He went further. Rosa said the visible portion is almost certainly not a standalone tattoo, but rather the continuation of a much larger design. If this is all we're seeing, this is most likely the continuation of something that covers this man's entire arm, he told Nancy Grace. Most likely he's got tattoos on his hands. And because the suspect is wearing a full balaclava covering his neck, Rosa added a detail that should be understood as having genuine investigative weight. He's most likely got tattoos on his neck, or maybe under his eye. Think about what that means for the identification effort. This is not a man with a small, discrete marking on his wrist. Based on the forensic analysis of multiple experts, he is likely heavily tattooed, arms, hands, and potentially neck and face. In a population, heavily tattooed individuals are more distinctive than unmarked individuals. In the specific subculture that this style of tattooing is associated with, Southwestern, gang culture, prison culture, the specific imagery is often identifiable to people within that world. The saints, the clouds, the roses, the memorial imagery that Rosa described as common in this style, these are recognizable designs to anyone who has spent time in those communities. Somewhere in Tucson or in the surrounding region, there is a person who has seen that wrist, seen those hands, seen the neck or the face beneath the balaclava that the suspect wore to Nancy Guthrie's door. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente, in his public analysis, made a point that should be heard clearly. He's probably in his 30s or 40s, and because he wasn't a professional, he definitely exhibited pre- and post-offense behavior that people around him can see. He said people who know this person have seen changes in his behavior before the crime and after. He may have tried to alter his appearance after the footage was released. He may have changed his vehicle. He may have left the area temporarily. But the tattoo does not change. The hands do not change. The people who know him have seen those hands every day. During the investigation, Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed publicly the possibility that the suspect seen in the doorbell footage may have been wearing a ring on his hand. "I look at the same photo you look at," Nanos said, "and I see it. I'm going to give that to my team. They'll analyze it and we'll see. Maybe it is." A ring worn on the hand of someone who otherwise took extraordinary precautions to avoid leaving physical evidence is a significant identifier. It is visible in footage. It is distinctive. It may be a wedding ring, a class ring, a religious ring, a gang ring. Each category narrows the pool of possible suspects in different ways. Combined with the tattoo, the physical profile of this suspect is becoming more specific with each expert analysis. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build, heavily tattooed in black and gray, consistent with Southwestern gang or prison style, with markings visible on the right wrist extending toward the hand and likely continuing up the arm and potentially to the neck. possible ring on the right or left hand. This is not an anonymous silhouette anymore. This is a person with a documented physical profile that someone in his life recognizes every day. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore said it directly on a national podcast. The only people with knowledge of what happened are the people who did it. The ring, the tattoo, the backpack, the holster, the specific combination of all of them on one person. Someone in Tucson has seen all of those things in one place. Investigators asked neighbors to submit surveillance footage going back to January 1st, a full month before the abduction. Within that request, they specifically flagged January 11th, asking neighbors to focus particularly on that date between 9 p.m. and midnight. A neighbor who lived close to Nancy Guthrie and had known her for years reported to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton that around January 11th, she saw a suspicious man walking in the direction of Nancy's house. She observed him from her window while getting ready in the morning. She said she could not make out his face. He was wearing street clothes, not shoes appropriate for exercise, and a baseball cap pulled very low. He was hunched over, walking slowly, looking around. He did not fit the neighborhood. He was moving too slowly for someone getting exercise and was paying specific attention to the street where Nancy lived. She told her husband about it at the time. She has since spoken to the FBI multiple times about what she saw. The FBI is zeroing in on January 11th. Multiple neighbors have reported that when investigators visited their homes, they asked specifically about that date. Do you know anything about what happened on January 11th? Do you have any video from January 11th? That is not a routine canvas question. That is a targeted inquiry into a specific date that investigators believe is relevant to what happened on February 1st. The prior surveillance visit, established by sources speaking to ABC News, CBS News, CNN, and Fox News, placed the suspect at Nancy's front door before the night of the abduction in an image captured without the backpack he carried on February 1st. If January 11th was the date of that first visit, the reconnaissance period was 21 days, 3 full weeks of whatever the suspect was doing between his first approach to that door and his return with the backpack and the plan. 3 weeks is enough time to observe, to confirm patterns, to identify the moments when the neighborhood is least active and the house is most isolated, to acquire the equipment, the backpack, the holster, the gun, the potential jammer, to finalize the planning. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jason Pack said publicly that the prior visit fundamentally changes the legal and investigative frame for this case. That's sophistication. That's the hallmark of someone who thought about this before they acted. And it matters significantly from a legal standpoint because premeditation and planning elevate the severity of what investigators are looking at. He added, the suspect in this case may have thought they were being careful, but appearing twice on camera while trying to avoid identification isn't careful. He was right in ways that are becoming more apparent as the investigation develops. The suspect appeared on camera during his reconnaissance visit without knowing he was being recorded. He appeared on camera again during the abduction, this time trying to cover it. And now the cameras from the back of the property have been examined, and sources describe what they found, or rather, what they did not find, as odd. Whatever was careful about his approach was not careful enough. The updated listing includes the footage of the suspect, the description of the backpack, and the full physical profile of the individual investigators are seeking. The page describes Nancy Guthrie as a vulnerable adult who has difficulty walking, has a pacemaker, and needs daily medication for a heart condition. It asks anyone with information that could lead to the identity of the suspect to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That the FBI chose to update this listing during the 7th week of the investigation rather than allowing it to remain static is itself a signal. It reflects the belief of the investigators running this case that the identification of the suspect is a function of public recognition, rather than of evidence they are waiting to process in a laboratory. They have a face beneath a mask. They have a tattoo on a wrist. They have a backpack from Walmart. They have a holster that was traced to a specific product. They have a ring on a hand. They believe that the person who can identify this man from these details is somewhere in the public, in Tucson, in a neighboring community, in a world that intersects with the world of black and gray tattoos and gang culture and southwestern desert communities. They are not waiting for someone to come forward with Nancy's location. They are waiting for someone to look at the wrist in that footage and recognize it. The mixed DNA sample recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the sample that investigators believe may contain the genetic profile of the suspect, is being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. Sheriff Nanos confirmed this publicly. The sample is described as mixed, meaning it contains DNA from more than one individual. The process of separating a mixed sample to isolate individual profiles requires time and precision. If the mixture is complex, 3 or more contributors, the separation becomes significantly more difficult and may not produce a profile clean enough for CODIS submission. But may not produce a profile clean enough for CODIS submission is not the same as cannot produce anything useful. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said publicly that even a weak profile, insufficient for database submission, may be enough for direct comparison if investigators develop specific suspects. If the suspect pool has been narrowed through other means, the tattoo, the ring, the Walmart backpack transaction records, the gun shop canvas, a weak DNA profile can still confirm or exclude specific individuals. The glove DNA presents a separate picture. DNA from an unidentified male was extracted from one of the gloves recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, a glove that appeared to match those worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage. That profile was submitted to CODIS, the national DNA database with more than 19 million offender profiles. It produced no match. The suspect or the person who wore that glove does not have a prior DNA profile in the federal criminal database. He has either never been arrested for a crime requiring DNA collection, or he has never been caught. Investigative genetic genealogy, the process applied to this evidence, does not require a CODIS hit. It requires uploading a DNA profile to public genealogy databases and searching for partial matches with users who have voluntarily submitted their own DNA for ancestry research. A partial match to a distant relative, a third cousin, a second cousin once removed, allows forensic genealogists to build a family tree and work forward and backward through generations until they identify a person whose age, sex, and geographic location match the suspect profile. This is the same process that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years, the same process that connected Brian Kohberger to the Idaho murders within weeks, the same process that has resolved cases cold since the 1970s. The FBI confirmed in mid-February that the DNA profile from the glove was expected to be uploaded to the relevant databases pending quality control review. Whether that upload has occurred and what partial matches it has generated, if any, has not been publicly disclosed. But the science is working. It is working in a Florida laboratory. It is working in genealogy databases. It is working in the router logs extracted from Nancy's home, in the cell tower data being mapped by the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team, in the Walmart transaction records being traced for the specific backpack, in the gun shop records being cross-referenced for the holster. All of it working at the same time. All of it pointing toward the same person. The person with the tattoo on the right wrist. The person who appeared on camera twice and thought neither time would be recorded. If the suspect came from the desert behind Nancy's property, approaching across the open terrain that borders the Catalina foothills homes from behind, he would have had to cross the back portion of Nancy's property before reaching the side and front. The cameras covering the pool, the backyard, and the side yard should, under normal circumstances, have detected that movement and triggered. They did not. The cameras had been reliably triggering in the days before. They triggered for people in the yard, whatever routine activity or maintenance was happening in that space in the period leading up to February 1st. They triggered for the law enforcement officers who arrived after Nancy was gone, but not on the night she was taken. 3 explanations remain active: a signal jammer active during the approach, a route through the property that specifically avoided the camera trigger zones, which would require prior knowledge of where those zones were, or something else that the investigators examining the footage have described only as odd and declined to specify further. The third explanation is the one that should keep everyone focused on the detail of the prior visit. A man who visited Nancy Guthrie's front door in January, who stood on that porch and looked at the camera and walked away and came back 3 weeks later, had 3 weeks to study this property from multiple angles, from the street, from neighboring properties, from any position that would have given him a view of the cameras, their coverage zones, their angles, their placement, relative to the approach routes from the back. 3 weeks is a long time to study a camera. It is long enough to know where to walk. 44 days since the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. and Nancy Guthrie walked into her home for the last time. 44 days since the cameras at her pool, her backyard, and her side yard were recording normally. 44 days since something happened to those cameras on the most critical night of this investigation. Something that a source with knowledge of the newly recovered images described with a single word: odd. That word is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a specific investigative question that the FBI has not yet answered publicly, that the Pima County Sheriff's Department has not addressed in a press conference, the last one of which was held 37 days before this video was published, and that the evidence being processed in laboratories and genealogy databases and cell tower analysis systems has not yet resolved. But the evidence is working. The tattoo on the right wrist is in the FBI database. The backpack is being traced through the Walmart transaction records. The holster has been identified and is being cross-referenced through gun shop sales. The January 11th footage request is being fulfilled by neighbors who are checking their archives and finding things they did not know were there. A neighbor saw a man walking toward Nancy's house on January 11th, baseball cap pulled low, head down, moving slowly, paying specific attention to her street. She told her husband, she told the FBI. And somewhere, the man she saw knows that she did. The cameras recorded nothing on the night Nancy was taken. The investigators found something in that nothing that one source described as odd. And the word odd in an investigation where every public statement has been measured and filtered and chosen for specific investigative purpose is not a casual observation. It is a thread being pulled. And threads, when pulled with the resources of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the tools of 2026, eventually lead somewhere. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million, $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI. If more than one person is involved, and multiple former FBI agents have said publicly that they believe this was not a one-person operation, the first person to speak receives the cooperation agreement. The second receives the full weight of the prosecution. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell said it on record. If there's more than one person involved, which I believe there is, they're now in an air fryer. It's just who's going to jump out first. $1.2 million is a lot of pressure to place on the trust between two people who did something together that they cannot undo. Subscribe to Unsolved Archive for continued coverage of this case. Turn on notifications. Every verified development will be covered here with documented sources and nothing else. Drop a comment. What do you think the cameras captured that a source described as odd? Because this case is going to break. The tattoo is in the footage. The evidence is in the lab. And somewhere a man with a marking on his right wrist is counting the days. Here at Unsolved Archive, we don't just tell stories, we search for truth.